Another hot, dry day here in Northeast Florida. Letting the water run through the hose here because it is hot. You can almost boil eggs. There we go. So I come home and my plants are very thirsty. Even though we got a little shower last night, it's been so hot. So I got all these plants here that are ready for a drink, including the orchid, very thirsty. Aloes, portulacaria, red maple cuttings or saplings, elm saplings, various cacti, but everything is dry as a bone. So, you know, even the cactus and succulents, so long as they're dry, you can water them as often as they're dry. And that actually will speed up their growth rate a little bit. So, because in nature they get very little rain. They come from dry, arid places, which is fine if you keep them on the dry side. But so long as they do dry out, you can water them again, and they will appreciate that. So all these babies, everything, including the aloes, trying to grow a pineapple here. So if you go to the grocery store, to the produce department, and ask for the tops of pineapples, you can stick them in soil, keep them moist, and they will root in. And in an ideal situation, if you live in a tropical or subtropical where they'll grow most of the year, you can get pineapple in between 2 to 3 years from a pineapple top from your local grocer. So if you've never tried that, highly recommend trying it. Homegrown pineapple is a treat. It'd certainly be a reason to have a house party or some guests over and everyone gets one little piece of pineapple. They don't get as big as usually what you see at the grocery store, but definitely tastes just as good. Give this spider plant a little water. Now this guy right here, this fella, is a yellow mimosa tree. I got to meet the parent of that plant when I was down the Keys a couple years ago, and I saw this yellow flowering tree from a distance on my way to head to a local drinking hole, and it also had seed pods all over it. So I stuffed my cargo short pants with the seeds from the tree, and here a few years later I got several of these growing. I also have some at some friends' houses. They're taking care of them for me. Got a little guy here I need to water. And they got some tomato plants right next to him. Oh, sorry, John. I think I just got the cameraman a little wet. I get a little excited when I water. So we're going to plant these tomatoes today. We're also going to transplant, believe it or not, I'm going to be transplanting cuttings, which is not something I highly recommend, but I got a new tray that I'm going to be experimenting in. This is somebody we'll talk about later. This is a native orchid. It's a type of epiphytic orchid that grows here in Northeast Florida, Encyclia canopsium. Grows in the live oak trees and the branches. This had fallen off. We were at a landscape job and a client had a live oak, and during a storm part of the branch had fallen off, and then the bark peeled off the branch, and there was this orchid growing right on it. They're actually fairly common here in Northeast Florida. It's a really cool orchid. The only epiphytic orchid that we have growing here. But in Duval County, we have approximately a dozen native orchids. And orchids do occur on every continent, every country, every state in the Union. There are wild orchids everywhere. Now, do they look like the Phalaenopsis that you see at the grocery store or at your garden centers? The Phalaenopsis is the most common, and then maybe the Dendrobium and the Cattleya. But no, they don't look the same. So there are hundreds and thousands of different types of orchids. And this Encyclia is definitely unique, just like all orchids are unique. So you can look it up online, Encyclia canopsium. All right, got one more here, and a couple more around the corner. Getting the Jatropha some water, and then my Jatropha burleandii seeds, and I think, okay, now this is kind of a big deal. I think I have germination. This is fantastic news. Here, I'm going to bring this up here. So in 8 days, excuse me, what's the day? The 20th. In 10 days, so 9/10, I planted these, and look at these little sprouts. This is the first time I've grown these. So earlier in our series, I think I brought this to everyone's attention. It's the first time I've ever grown this jatropha from seed, but all the other jatrophas I've grown from seed have done very well. So I count 1, 2, 3 that have germinated so far. I've planted 25, so hopefully I'll have a high germination rate, and then I'll put these into smaller pots. Small pots as they grow, and then graduate them up into bigger and bigger pots. Very, very, very cool. I'm excited to see what happens with those. I do have some plants over here I need to water. So watering is crucial. So this is like horticulture, gardening 101. Water your plants. If they're dry, water them. If they dry out every day, water them every day. If they dry out every 2 days, water them every 2 days, and so on and so forth. But you need to soak them. You need to let them dry out. And then you soak them again. So people always come into the garden center at Earthworks and they're like, how often do I water my plants? And I tell them as needed. And that sounds kind of like a flip answer, but I do go into more detail. And basically what I say is that your plants need to be soaked. And ideally they need to be, if they're in containers, you need to soak them until water runs out the bottom. And then you water the plants. And then sometimes, like I'm doing now, I go back over them a second time, make sure I get a nice deep soak, because sometimes when they're really dry, the water just runs right out and the plant doesn't actually get very much of it. So going over a second time is pretty important, making sure that the water doesn't just run all out, but actually all throughout the pot, all the soil in there, all the roots are getting a nice deep soak. And then I let them dry out. Now that could be tomorrow, but I'll check. It could be the next day. And it's also going to depend on the time of year, because the hotter it is and the more direct sun these plants are in, the more sun, the hotter the pots get, the quicker the soil dries out. Now I'm going to run out on the outside here, get a few more plants. There's another one of those yellow mimosas right here. We've got some more portulacaria. This is a desert rose, and if we get a close-up on this desert rose, it's showing its lipstick. If you look real close, you'll see that it's getting ready to bloom. This is another plant that forms a caudex, swollen trunk, and comes from dry, arid regions, and has a spectacular flower, really showy. They come in pinks, reds, whites, bicolor, so pink and white, red and white, pink and red. Sometimes they have like a little yellow throat in the center. Very, very cool plant. The only thing about the desert rose, much like other succulents, is that they don't like hard frosts or freezes, sub-freezing weather, and they don't like to stay wet all the time. So yes, you can water them as often as they dry out, but don't keep them wet. Make sure that they are dry. And these things, I did not water yesterday. It's been pretty dry here at the beach, and these small pots get really hot in the sun and it dries out the soil, so they needed a good soak. So we got that one done. And now I'll roll this hose up and we will begin transplanting some cuttings here.